it's funny because it's actually it's a 20th century play, as opposed to really being modern dress, because it takes place in theory, like in the late 30s, early 40s. So some of the first challenge is just doing the research and finding the right sources for everyday clothing. And there's a whole series of books put out by Dover called Everyday Clothing of the X, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. So that's been a major source. And almost all the costumers in the world use that same series of books, because it's things out of Sears Roebuck catalog, and particularly for this play, it's a very middle-class family. You know, and you wouldn't want to go to Harper's Bazaar or Vogue and look at what the clothing is in there, because it's just not going to be appropriate for normal people. And then this play also has a series of fantasy sequences, and then finding the fantasy sequences from that time was also something I needed to do. Particularly like The Wizard of Oz. You know, that was pretty straightforward. That was actually pretty straightforward, The Wizard of Oz. You know, you rent the movie and you look at it and you say, oh, there's the witch and there's the OEO soldier guy, which of course I now know is a Winky. I didn't know that was a Winky, but now I know it's a Winky. And then the little monkey boy. So that was relatively easy. But when we got to like the prairie fantasy, kind of prairie / cowboy / frontier fantasy, it's Ralphie's fantasy. So I had to go find sources of things from what he would have seen as Western. So it was who were his. So I was looking at Hopalong Cassidy and Roy Rogers, and then looking in some catalogs where they actually had Roy Rogers things you could buy to wear, just like Roy Rogers. So that was kind of interesting. And then there's a swamp fantasy, and so it's like, okay, what reference is he going to have on a swamp fantasy? Well, probably really early Tarzan movies. Or, you know, so it's trying to find those things that represent their view of what a swamp fantasy is. I mean, now we would think more like Indiana Jones, but that wouldn't be in their world. So that was a challenge. And then in general, I think with when you're doing truly contemporary dress, I think one of the challenges is that everybody in the room is an expert. And so there is much more dealing with individual style as much as there is dealing with design, if that makes sense. The way I begin my kind of collaboration in any given project is different depending on each project. For St. Joan, we all met together where the director is for a solid day and went through scene by scene by scene. For a play like Amadeus, we were not able to do that. So it starts usually with a phone conversation. I'll say, hello, it's time for us to talk about the show. And so Paul and I had several phone conversations. I sent him things, I mailed him things, and then he managed it. He came down one day and we spent a day going through things. For this show, for Christmas Story, I had known John back when he was a student, which makes this really fun. And so we did a couple of quick emails, set up a phone appointment, and talked. And that happens pretty frequently, that I start my collaboration with a phone conversation, to be followed usually at that point by some kind of research thing, saying, you know, here's the period, here's what it looks like, what do we like, what do we not like. And then I usually do some kind of preliminary sketches. Sometimes those sketches go forward and they are the final sketches. Inevitably there's something in the preliminaries that one of us, either I'll say, you know, here's what I've drawn, but can you help me because I'm not sure I'm hitting the mark here, or the director will say, I see why you did that, but it's not exactly what I was thinking. And I go, okay, okay, and then I'll send a revision, and then sometime later I'll do color sketches. The time period in which that occurs also changes from project to project. For St. Joan, we were working very far ahead. For Amadeus, I'm not even sure why, but probably because the season gets chosen in March and that show was opening in September, we had much more of a compressed time to do the designs. And then for this show, I had a little more time because it was the third show of the season, so John and I could have a little more leisure in terms of doing it. And then for the Fantastics, which is coming up, we had a concept meeting during late spring, early summer. For that show, because we're updating it to the present, it's important for me as costume designer that I know the cast before I start doing very much in the way of design. And fortunately, Vicki Bussert, the director, is going to be here directing Title of Show, so we'll probably work together on that piece then. Well, I think one of the greatest compliments an actor can pay me is when they put on the costume and go, "Oh, this just now makes so much sense, and I understand so much more." And for that reason, frankly, sometimes the most exciting moment for me is not actually the dress rehearsal. Sometimes the most exciting moment for me is during a fitting, when we put the costume pieces on the actor, and the actor, well, we're all looking in the mirror to see what they look like, and when I get that glimmer of, okay, this works, this actually is going to work really well. That sometimes is the most exciting moment, because you now know that you're on the right path. Now, sometimes it happens that you have that moment and it's not the right path. Either because maybe the actor, in rehearsal, something's gone on that has kind of changed a direction that no one understood how to communicate until it's literally the pieces are on. Or sometimes what you think will work for a character, you put it on the actor and it's not right for the actor. So I, knock on wood, I have had more of the wonderful epiphanies than I've had the oh darn moments. But the fitting is really, I think, critical to doing a show. That's really where I always liken costume design is like designing a mosaic. There's 1,000 little tiny pieces that go to make up the design, and when you go in really, really close, right next to the actor, which is what you're doing in the fitting, that's one aspect of the design. And then when you get to dress rehearsal, you're pulling way, way, way out, and now you're looking at what all those little pieces mean in terms of a big picture. And they're both wonderful, but the fitting is that moment when you're down close and going, this is 1/8 of an inch, or this is, it's tiny little notes that you're doing versus, when you get back in the house and you sit there and you go, oh, wow, that really sticks out. Well, I have to say that without the shop, all I do would be a pile of sketches and some bolts of fabric. That's it. I am constantly made to look far more talented and far more craftsmanlike than I have any right to look, mostly because of what the costume shop does. They do independent research on period shapes, and when they bring me that research, it gives me additional choices I can make. And it also relieves a lot of my burden, frankly, as a designer, because I'm not responsible for supplying every little iota. They have things they bring to the table. Now, sometimes when we're doing like an ITC show, which is oftentimes exaggerated reality. It's a question of, okay, it's not about what kind of period is it, but how far should I go outside the reality, and what kind of materials can I suggest to Dottie that will enhance the silhouette or make it work better. But in every case, they are so supportive, and all they really want you to be as a designer is to be clear, to have the information they need to do their job, to give them renderings that show them what you want, and to be decisive in answering questions. I mean, if you do that, they'll make you look great. They'll do all of that for you, and I just feel constantly lucky, especially at the Rep. I mean, there are very few other shops, I think, that come up to the care that this costume shop brings to the project. When I go shopping for fabric, people often tend to think that a costume designer actually does the sewing. They say, "Oh, are you going to sew all these?" And I go, "No." And usually I have drawings, and then they go, "Oh, you did all the drawings?" I'm not sure it's always clear what the difference is between the idea part, because so much of what you do as a designer is you're trying to tell a story or describe a character through the medium of clothing. So clothing is in a way the medium, not the message. And I'm not sure that the average person understands how much advance work you have to do to get there. It's not the same as fashion design, I think, is the other confusion. I mean, fashion design is something that predicts a style, something that you want people to then emulate in the future. Costume design quite often is looking back and pulling out of a period or a style, unless of course you're doing the Glass Menagerie on Mars, but it's trying to pull something out that will assist you, and so you have such a heritage, I think, as a costume designer to fashion designers, but you're not predicting what will happen in the future the way fashion does. And so yeah, I get paid for my taste to a certain degree, because I'm going to choose some things that other designers wouldn't choose, but ultimately it's about the importance of the story through the medium, and I always design, frankly, for that first entrance moment of the character, and hopefully you glean a lot of things from the color, the shape, the line. You can glean perhaps generation, perhaps ethnicity, perhaps social, economic status, personal taste of the character. Those things, I think, I hope, help the actor, going back to an earlier discussion, help the actor, so those are things the actor isn't totally responsible for either. It's assisting. But and then of course I have to say, every time I talk to a theater audience, they all want to talk about quick changes. It's the magic of quick change, I think, is endlessly fascinating because it's invisible. Well, I can't wait to see the Wizard of Oz fantasy. I gotta tell you, those costumes are so fabulous, between the witch and the Winky and the little monkey boy, and they're going to be on stage for 30 seconds maybe, and they have 30 seconds to do bam, here's what we are, and then I can't wait to see those. I think those are I think that's just going to be swell. I think it's just really swell.